took him as a traitor and shot him, but they organized it to look like he was acting for the cause. So the traitor becomes a hero.
But
he also assumes it. And in the Italian version in the movie, the young man visits the hometown where it's set in fascist Italy. You get the idea? And then he discovers that everybody is in on the play. He's the only one that doesn't know.
Oh my God. Thanks very much. Give me your name so that then I can put, how we do it. I love this absolute hypocrisy. That when I will be honest, I will put a footnote, but a small footnote at the end of the book, I owe this idea to you. You know how you can play even a nastier game? So that you say, after writing this book, I discovered that a good friend of mine had a similar idea and so on. There's all these strategies of cheating and so on. You know where I was the nastiest, but it was mad at me? With John Kovjak. I took an idea from her. So in the first version, I put a footnote. You have this phrase, typical, where you say, I borrowed this idea from blah blah, but of course, it's his idea, but if there are any mistakes, misdevelopments, they are my fault. I just turned it around. I said, I took this idea from John Kovjak, but I developed it, so it's mine. But if anything is wrong, then fuck it, it's her idea. And so on. Unfortunately, she disappointed me. She had some problems. She didn't. She wanted to be celeb. Okay, but you know what? There are. Yes, speaking Bertolucci, I totally agree with you. I think the early Bertolucci's are his true masterpieces. This one, and then of course Primo della Rivoluzione, Before the Revolution, and so on. He was. I think his 20th century, Novecento, is so-so. After that, starting with Jill Clayburgh, La Luna, Incest Story, it goes down. Then movies like The Little Buddha, they are stuff for Gulag, because that's what it to be. Okay, let's do it now, and then we go on if you want the stupid thing. Okay, now, we will not be able to go through the whole entire line, but I will try to give you an idea of what Hegel calls reflexivity, how this functions in contrast, what I announced already at the beginning, in contrast to what is usually referred to as this post-Hegelian anti-philosophy, this idea that we should break out of the closed circle of philosophical idealist representation into some kind of real-life foundation. My thesis will be I will take as my example a short story by Italo Calvino, which I want to give a twist to it, a kind of a Stalinist twist, making it Hegelian. It's just to give you first an idea of this reflexivity between inside outside. The story is told, maybe it's one of these well-known volumes. A king listens. It focuses on the sense of hearing. In an anonymous kingdom, the royal palace becomes a giant ear, and the king, obsessed and paralyzed by fears of rebellion, tries to hear every fragile sound that reverberates in his palace. Footsteps of the servants, whispers, conversations, fanfare trumpets at the raising of the flag, ceremonies, sounds of the city at the outskirts of the palace, riots, rumble of the rifles, and so on and so on. The king cannot see the source of all these sounds, but is obsessed by interpreting their meaning and the destiny they are predicting. This interpretive paranoia only seems to... So again, that's how the king lives. It's kind of, sounds everywhere, my God, totally paranoid, what do they mean, and so on and so on. Is it a plot against me or whatever? Interpreting all of this. Then something happens which puts a stop to this interpretive paranoia and completely enchants the king. Through the window, the wind brings in a singing voice of a woman, a voice of pure beauty, unique, irreplaceable. For the king, it is the sound of freedom. He steps out of the palace into the open space and mingles there with the crowd. Now, again, the first thing you should bear in mind here is that this king is not the traditional monarch, but a modern totalitarian tyrant. A traditional king doesn't care about his environment. He arrogantly ignores it. He leaves the worry to prevent plots to his ministers. It is the modern leader who is obsessed by plots. To rule is to interpret is a perfect formula for Stalinism, which was the system of endless paranoia hermeneutics. So, when the king is seduced by the pure feminine voice of immediate life pleasure, this is obviously, although unfortunately not for Calvino himself, a fantasy. Precisely the fantasy of breaking out of the closed circle of representations, of rejoining the pure outside of the innocent presence of the feminine voice, which is a kind of excess of the self-mirroring prison house of representations. This voice needs no interpretation, it only gives body to the voice which enjoys, as it were, its own exercise. But this is, again, if I got it correctly, how Calvino himself proposes the story. It's another variation on this old Susan Sontag motive of against interpretation. That this vicious circle of interpretation is a kind of a closure, prison of language, of our existence, and that the art of life is to break out of this into the fresh air of immediate presence. But I think that I will simply try now to, of course, I disagree with this. I think this is a metaphysical myth. So how should we rewrite the story? If you know my evil Stalinist mind, you will already have guessed it. How should we rewrite the story to make it the way I want to have it? What is missing here is the way this innocent externality of the voice is itself already, how should I put it, marked, inscribed into the mirror of interpretive representation. What we should do is this, I think. This is how I would have added just one paragraph to the story. When the king exits the palace, following the voice, he is immediately arrested. The feminine voice was an instrument of the plotters to lure him out of the safety of the guarded palace, and so on and so on. I would like to, precisely, this point of externality he clings to, he falls into the trap, that's the true plot. The true plot is not all the rumors and so on. The true intelligent plot is precisely to give you a way out, which brings us, if I may indulge in another ideological reflection, maybe you know this line, but I like it, nonetheless, which brings us to how we should interpret this critique of ideology, this, how should I call it, reference to the obscenity of the sounds themselves, the obscene materiality of language, voice, of symbolic texture. Maybe you know the story, but I would like to repeat it. Something happened, I come from Slovenia, which is south of Austria. In south of Austria, bordering Slovenia, there is a province called Carinthia. They had the glorious leader, Jörg Haider, the well-known proto-fascist populist. His card, which he played again and again in politics, was that, which is totally ridiculous, that we Slovenes pose a threat to Carinthia, that we want to occupy it. So, his big political motto was, Kärnten bleibt Deutsch. Carinthia will or should remain German. How did some friends of mine, not of mine, but I met them later, leftists counter-attack? Not as you would have expected with a complex interpretation. They didn't point out how he evokes, all these usual boring Marxist